Salomé joined me on this plateau. Salomé is journalist, and she has worked for Arte TV,
Yes.
and she is now in Switzerland organizing literature events, and she's journalist at the newspaper Le Temps and the Swiss National Television, RTS, and the online media Heidi.news. So thank you very much, Salomé, and I hand over to you.
Hi, thank you. Thank you very much, Johny Pitts, for this very moving speech and call for a reveal culture, we can say. I'm very pleased to welcome you also, Amin Maalouf. I'm going to say a few words about both of you, and then we're going to open this chat. Amin Maalouf, you were born in Beirut in a family of teachers and writers. You mainly lived in Lebanon until 1976, when the civil war forced you to move to Paris. You long worked as a journalist and traveled the world to do so before you decided to dedicate yourself to your writings and to literature. You're a member of the prestigious Académie Française since 10 years, I guess. You wrote about 10 novels, among which The Rock of Tanyos, won the Prix Goncourt in 1993. You also wrote opera librettos and 6 non-fiction essays. One of them, I was already say, Les identités meurtrières, in English, in the name of identity, violence, and the need to belong, was awarded with the European Essay Prize in 1999. I can easily say that this book became and remains a real foundation, to not say Bible, because I'm not sure you'd like it, but a foundation to all the readers that are willing to build a world for peace, respect and diversity, and Johny Pitts is one of them. This success is everything I wish for your book, Afropean, Notes from Black Europe, Johny Pitts. Good evening again. Today it's your turn to be awarded with the European Essay Prize. I'm sure it means a lot to you after the odyssey you made from London to Moscow to meet African European citizens, among others. We're going to say more about it, of course, but first I'm going to introduce you a little bit to everybody who's listening to us now. Just as Amin Maalouf, you worked as a journalist, but you're also a renowned photographer, a poetry performer, as we just heard a little bit, and rewarded writer. You're also part of ENAR, for European Network Against Racism, and in 2013 you launched Afropean.com, which you'll correct me if I'm not exact, which has much to see with the book we're about to speak, but is also a very complimentary read that I recommend to everybody. Will come back to it. Maybe you'll tell us a little bit about what we can find on Afropean.com. Johny Pitts, you expressly asked to have this discussion with Amin Maalouf tonight. So maybe we could start, you already said, and I found it very beautiful, the night that you read this book, but maybe you could develop a little bit why was it such a strong discovery for you, Les identités meurtrières?
Thank you so much for the introduction. Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit of a, I guess you could say, an autodidact. You know, a lot of my knowledge came from outside of the academy and from these strange spaces. And actually, there's something wonderful about finding this book in this space that I try and write about. Actually, in the book, which is that kind of no man's land that a lot of Europeans don't think about, which is, you know, the people who are guarding European buildings, who are cleaning up European streets. And I was in this environment. I was working at a broadcaster, working on an overnight shift, and I would always notice how there would mostly white people would inhabit this space during the daytime, and then they would leave this space in the night, and then in would come Eastern Europeans for the most part, who would cook food for the people who were working on the night shift, and then Africans who would work as security guards for the building. Almost all from these backgrounds for each specific job. Something very colonial, neo-colonial about this. And then we had Nepalese people who would clean the offices. And it was in this kind of environment, this space, I would very often do the research for my book. It would give me time when not much was happening and there were no eyes on me. I'd kind of moonlight and do the real work that I wanted to do while I was having to do this kind of other job. And that's how I discovered Amin Maalouf's work. And I love that the fact that I describe my work as a kind of bricolage. And I love that this book found me in this kind of way, in not an obvious way. It wasn't recommended to me. It found its way to me, and I feel like it was really meant to be. And the first thing that struck me was, above all else, the beauty of the writing. I mean, I read the English translation, so I'm sure that in French it's even more beautiful. But that's the first thing that struck me is Amin Maalouf as a writer. And the way he could convey things that many other academics couldn't, you know, how the work was succinct and clear and evocative. That was what really moved me and really transformed my writing. It was persuasive as well. You know, that's what I really felt about that book. Is very often there is a lot of navel gazing, especially among left-wing circles and in academia. Is people talking to each other about something that they're not really connected with at street level. Whereas I feel like anybody could read this book, and I think that for anybody who does. I think they would be persuaded, you know, and that felt really important to me as I was reworking my sentences in the next draft. Because when I say I had the first draft already, really it was just a bunch of notes. I wrote it longhand on some notebooks. I had 5 notebooks full of stains and stuff from my trip. And it was trying to then put that into something that made sense. This book was one of the most crucial books in terms of reminding me to make this work beautiful as well as anything else. I'm not saying that I achieved that, by the way, but that was the goal after reading Amin Maalouf's work.
Thank you, and I think that this very clear style is also what helped to make it so iconic and important in our bookshelves. Amin Maalouf, maybe you could tell us. I know you read Johny Pitts' books. How was it? Tell us how. I'm not sure you read it in the same situation, but tell us a little bit how this read moved you.
Notre conversation va avoir lieu en anglais.
Non, pardon.
Non, c'est bon. Je voulais dire que c'est notre langue, notre langue commune à vous, à Johny et à moi, la seule dans laquelle nous puissions nous exprimer directement. Je voulais dire 2 mots en français avant, juste pour féliciter Johny pour ce prix, très mérité, et pour féliciter le jury d'avoir pensé à lui et d'avoir décidé de lui décerner ce prix. Je pense, et je le redirai au cours de notre conversation, je pense que c'est un livre important, agréable à lire par ailleurs, très bien écrit par ailleurs, mais avant tout important. Tout au long de la lecture, je me disais que nos responsables, je pensais en particulier aux responsables français, puisque je suis français, je vis en France depuis 45 ans, devraient laisser tout ce qu'ils font maintenant, prendre ce livre et le lire et réfléchir à ce que dit ce livre sur notre réalité, sur la réalité de notre société, de nos banlieues, et pas seulement de nos banlieues, de tout le tissu social. Voilà ce que je voulais dire en préambule. Now I move to what Johny was saying about the place of people who are on the border between different cultures, between different nations. We have made of these people a liability while they are an asset. They have a mission, they should have a mission to build bridges between so many different cultures, cultures between which there are so much prejudice, which is destroying our world. These people who have an intimate knowledge of many cultures, and especially their culture of origin and the culture in which they are living, they have a very important role to play. They must be those who make the relations possible and positive and fruitful. And most of them struggle just to demonstrate that they have a place, any place at all. They are struggling all the time, while people like what I read in the book of Johny Pitts, people have the lucidity, they have the benevolence, they have the will to contribute in all walks of life to building a society that can work and that can develop and that can be peaceful.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm just seeing this picture that you have in your bookshelf, Amin Maalouf, and I suppose it's your parents, maybe. And
no, in fact, it's a photo from Spain.
Okay.
Well, it's a long story, but it's not my parents.
But anyway, what I wanted to say is there is a very strong common point between your two books, that they're not books written by scholars doing a sociological study. They're based on your personal narrative and experience and origins and relation to the world. And maybe you could both tell us how much important this is in your work and in those books specifically. And how did your origin and situation and experience shaped also your travel journey?
Yeah, I'd like to go back to the kind of influence that Amin's work had on my own, because I think this term Afropean emerges in the early 1990s and in the music scene. A Belgian-Congolese group called Zap Mama used this term, and it's beautiful work, and Zap Mama continued to be a massive inspiration to me. But I think, you know, when I began this journey, there was an overconfidence in what Afropean could be. And I think the reason why I was overconfident is that I wanted it to be something that was very aspirational. You know, I was looking at these success stories of Black Europeans who were effortlessly and elegantly, you know, juggling their multiple allegiances, you know. I was almost using Afropean as a kind of brand, you know. And what reading in English, Amin's book is called On Identity. And what reading this book reminded me is that, you know, to quote Audre Lorde, you can't tear down the master's house using the master's tools. So I can't challenge nationalism and ethnic absolutism by producing something that is, you know, ethnically absolute. You know, so Afropean couldn't be something that was too solid. It couldn't be something that was too sure of itself. It had to be something that almost like a heuristic, you know, that I could move through a portal into an experience where I could open things up and suggest a blur. It had to be a point of departure rather than, I think, a point of arrival. And I think that's the journey that I made throughout writing this book. And because I realized initially this term Afropean even excluded my own experience growing up as somebody who was working class on the outskirts of an industrial city that included the Yemeni community, the Somali community, the Jamaican community, and the white working class community. My upbringing wasn't glamorous and didn't involve fashion photographers and PR companies. And so, you know, I really had to remember that as I was going out into European streets, that this couldn't just be about the success stories. As Amin mentioned just earlier, you know, there are so many people who are willing to contribute, who want to contribute to Europe, but have been prevented from doing so. You know, so before they can even think about contributing to Europe, they're having to come up against so many other different forces and walls. And I'm thinking here about the work of a great journalist called Doug Saunders, who produced a book called Arrival Cities, and he talks about these places of arrival that we can find all around the world, from the outskirts of Delhi to Clichy-sous-Bois to Rinkeby in Stockholm to Firth Park, like the place I grew up in. These are places that where so-called immigrants will arrive and try and take part, and then they have children. And the children want to take part too. And it's in all of our interests to make sure that these places stay dynamic, that they don't turn into ghettos, that the people are allowed to take part. And what his research found, you know, and this is nothing, I'm not being anti-Islamic here, because I don't have any problem with somebody expressing their faith. But what Doug Saunders found is that actually when each generation is progressively accepted into European society more and more, they will identify less with the culture of their parents. And so there's this kind of, and not that I think that is the thing that should happen, but it's a weird way that Europe has of dealing with these areas, whereby by banishing the people who are there, they're actually contributing to extremism, you know, more, by shunting them out to the periphery and not allowing each generation to progress and take part in society. And so that's something that I think we all have to be very conscious of, and we have a stake in it all. I mean, Amin Maalouf said that all the way back, you know, then in 1998.
Amin Maalouf, would you like to react?
Yeah, in fact, in my book, the core idea of the identités meurtrières is that every one of us has a number of what I call in French appartenance. And all these appartenance make one's identity. And the identity of each one of us is very specific because it's made of all these elements. And there is we are pushed, in fact, throughout our life to exclude elements of our identity, to exclude all these appartenance and choose only one of them, either religious or national or other, and say, well, this is the one that is important, all the rest has no importance. And the idea of identité meurtrière is that those who just choose one are the murderers, because they choose one identity which will lead them to fight against others. Whoever decides to adopt all elements of one's identity, all the appartenance, will find that he or she have links to every other person in this world. So we have to accept our identity. And the idea, the core idea of Afropean is exactly, as I see it, the same. The idea that if a person that has appartenance from Europe and Africa and some other places, including Americas and other, if they are free and even encouraged to include all these elements, to claim all these elements, to fructify all these elements, this is not only better for the person, it's better for the society where the person is living.
Absolutely. And here, an idea that was very useful to me, I mean, I probably quote this scholar way too much, but he also looms large in my work, is the work of a British sociologist, Paul Gilroy. And he has a work, The Black Atlantic, in which he asks us, instead of looking at a nation for identity, he suggests that we create an imaginative identity based in the space between nations. So in terms of the black communities, he calls that the Black Atlantic. So if you invert the map, instead of looking at the nations and you look at what is between the nations, you know, the Caribbean, Africa, Europe, America, you have, of course, the story of the Middle Passage. You have black sailors who would try and avoid the laws in each nation by going into the maritime world. But you also have the suggestion of an identity based in the water, so that's something that's fluid and dynamic rather than solid and set. And I think ideas like that, these really imaginative ideas that allow us to go beyond the confines of a kind of blood and soil narrative, for me are really important, because I think the blood and soil narrative is where these deadly identities can often be found.
And I would add that this is very important, not because it will make our lives easier as persons or society. It's a matter of survival, because our societies are not working. They're falling apart. And if we don't find imaginative solutions that make people feel at home wherever they are and involved in the life and the survival of their society, we are going in the wrong direction, and very fast.
Absolutely. I mean, I actually want to ask you about that, because you kind of end the book where you're speculating the future, which is the job in many ways of the writer, you know, and you talk about this world where complex identities are so embraced that your grandson, you know, would almost marvel at this book that you made. That's, you know, he wouldn't be able to believe that things ever needed to be said. And of course, you must be disappointed to see how things, you know, have turned out.
Profoundly disappointed. I think we've gone in the wrong direction, and we're still going in the wrong direction. We're not going towards a world where people are closer together. In fact, in a way, they're getting closer to each other, but this has produced repulsion towards each other. And we need to think this evolution, to find solutions in every society, in Europe as a whole, in the world as a whole, and we're not doing it at all. We're just dealing with the latest incident, trying to weather the storm. Nobody is really building basis for the future.
Yeah, that's something that I absolutely think, you know, things so often can get reduced to a hashtag, especially in this social media world, you know, and the worry is that that because of the system in which activists are having to operate at the moment, or are operating, there are these waves and trends. Even I think of something like Extinction Rebellion that came and went, and the worry is things like you know, Black Lives Matter. You know, it's like feast or famine. It's everything. All the eyes are on it, and then it disappears, and there's no longevity. You know, and I think we really have to be conscious of that we move beyond gestures, online gestures, and try and build something that is really sustainable over the long run.
And that's why I think your book is very important. And I intend to tell the few friends I have among policymakers and politicians to take it and read it, and reflect on it, because I think it's very important to understand in which direction we are going and in which direction we should go.
I totally agree, and I would like to maybe just a little detail that is so relevant to me, and when you were talking about diversity, the English book is called Afropean, and translated into French by Georges Monny, it becomes Afropean au pluriel, with an S, which seems to me so important to mention, because it's also what you said, that there is not one identity that would be global. And also talking about translation and language, Amin Maalouf, you mentioned that we were speaking English for this meeting, which is our common language, which is also your native language. Johny, can you tell us a little bit about multiculturalism, multilingualism in Europe during your travel, please, which is a subject that is very important to Amin Maalouf?
Yeah, I mean, somebody once said to me, and I thought this was really important, that the true language of Europe is the language of translation, you know? And I think that actually, you know, thinking about things that way, I don't think that just is just about language, but also about culture, you know, that we can work to translate each other's cultures, you know. I think that is the role in many ways of those of us who are kind of on the front line of juggling these multiple identities. Because actually one thing that really, you know, I was a little bit naive, I suppose, when I was setting out for this journey. But of course, you know, I didn't find an Afropean utopia exactly, you know. I didn't find, in some ways I didn't find Afropeans. I found fragments of the notion of Afropean all around the continent, and it never really fit together perfectly, you know. So when I was in Lisbon, I met Cape Verdeans who had a problem with Angolans. When I was in Stockholm, I met Tunisians who had a problem with Somalians. You know, I found this all over the continent, that not just the disjuncture between white and black, but within the black community, or let's be honest, black communities, a lot of division there. And one of the goals of my book, in a way, and one of the virtues of being able to write a book, is that it contains a central narrative, and I could allow communities to talk to each other through the book, even if they weren't really talking to each other in real life. I could show the kind of commonalities that they have, and the opportunity for solidarity, and the issues that each community are facing. You know, I still think we're living in the wake of colonialism, you know, and there are so many similar issues that each community are facing, even if you were to speak to each community, and they wouldn't necessarily see the commonalities, you know. So again, you know, this notion of Afropean, it's a really imaginative space. I don't even walk around myself saying that I'm Afropean. It's just a way for Europe maybe, to start thinking of this blur in identity, you know, and to open up a chance, you know. My mentor, Carol Phillips, who wrote a book called The European Tribe in the 1980s, you know, he quoted E.M. Forster, you know, only connect. And I hold that really close to my heart, that notion of trying to look for the connections rather than the things that divide us, and really focusing on how we might connect. That was my goal, and it never fit together perfectly. In many ways, this book is, I keep saying this, but this book is a happy failure. You know, it's my notion of Afropean fell apart into many fragments, and I had to piece it back together, and it didn't fit perfectly. But I describe it at the end of the book as a kind of solid utopia, a place where there's still a dream there that we might to connect, no matter how disheveled it is in the end, that it can still fit together, even if imperfectly.
Thank you so much. You mentioned the end of Les Identités Meurtrières, where Amin Maalouf speaks to his grandson, hoping that he will never have to read this book. I would like to talk about the conclusion to your book, which is also very beautiful, where you get to Al Jazeera and you look at Africa in front of you. Here in Switzerland, we're a little bit obsessed with our own great travelers, from Nicolas Bouvier to Ella Maillard. But you mentioned another great traveler who wrote also Ibn Battuta, and which calls us to reread it. And I wanted to say also, you call yourself a black traveler, and it's something to say that. It's not nothing to say that, because you say that it's kind of an exception because it's a luxury in some way. And maybe it's time also for Europe to get out of her white-gazed construction by also reading some other travelers that wrote about her in different times.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned Afropean.com. So one thing that was important for me is to take my community with me, and so the book comes out of the online community, which is run by Yomi Bazaway, Nina Kamara, and Nata Lumen, and then all of the people that have contributed to that online space over the years. But also, then when I was on the road, that community helped me navigate through Europe. You know, I stayed on people's sofas, they told me where to go, and so I was the person making this particular journey, but I really was powered by this community of people, some of whom I'd never met, you know. But also what was important to do that is kind of almost theoretically to situate myself in a long line of other people. Like, I'm not the first person to write a book like this, and I didn't want to appear to be the first person to write a book like this. So it was important for me to look at people like Teti Michel Pomassi, who wrote an incredible book called An African in Greenland. You know, it was important for me to look at Langston Hughes and the time he spent in the Soviet Union in the 1930s. He wrote about it in the 1950s. Claude Mackay was Jamaican and also spent a lot of time traveling and wrote an incredible book called Banjo. Two books actually, but one novel called Banjo, which was all set in Marseille, which is one of my favorite books. But it was important, Ibn Battuta is a part of that. It was important to sort of challenge the notion of the traveler, of being this white, all-conquering colonial explorer. I wanted to look at a different lineage and try and place myself within that lineage. And also, I mean, something that a lot of people tell me when they're reading this book, and they say it as if they mean it in a positive way, hopefully they do, but they say it's a book I had to keep putting down. and I think the reason they're saying that is because, you know, they're hearing about these books and these travelers, and then they're putting it down and researching them. And my hope is that, like, I see this work in many ways as entry level. You know, it's after you read my book, I hope that somebody who isn't acquainted with somebody like Frantz Fanon, which in my book, I'm more interested in his story fighting in World War II, Frantz Fanon as the alternative war hero, than any of his theories, actually, because it's an entry point into his work. I want people to come away from my book and have a whole series of books that they might want to read. And of course, Amin Maalouf's book is one of the first that they should read after my book, if they're not acquainted with his work already. So it was important to really remember that I'm standing on the shoulders of giants, you know, and make the giants visible to a new generation.
I see the giant Amin Maalouf saying yes, yes, yes. Would you like to comment?
I just wanted to say one word. I've been hearing all that Johny says. Just to thank Salomé for noting that it is a travel book. And I think we've spoken about the content, about the ideas that are very, very important, as I said. But it is a very, very interesting, thrilling travel book. And I'm an avid reader of travel books, and I enjoyed every page of it.
It's a travel book, but it's also, there's a lot of things in this book. There's also historical insights. There's little biographies. There's some monument visits, and there's some very, very moving moments.
That is the essence of a travel book, to travel everywhere and in all dimensions.
I wanted to ask you, I mean, as a novel writer, and when you pick up some historical characters, is it also a way for you to give us another opportunity to look at our own history?
Certainly, certainly. Although when I need to say things very directly, I prefer not to put them in the mouth of a character. So I write essays. When I write a story, that usually, because the story interests me and I find the character, whether a historical character or a purely fictional character, interesting, and I love telling stories. Even, in fact, even when I write essays, I love telling stories.
Maybe I could just go back. I forget to ask you something I find very important. We spoke about multilingualism, and there is a language, a universal language that pops up every time in this book, which is music. Maybe we could, and black music has such an important history in this colonized world and decolonized world, and we're now talking in a very special moment. Johny, can you maybe tell us what was it so important? You're born to a musician father. How music is maybe a common culture that we can share and that can find a kind of unicity.
You know, if I was a good enough musician, I wouldn't have written a book. I'd have made an album. You know, because one of the incredible things about music is the inherent fusion contained within the music. You don't have to say anything. You can take. I mean, if you look at and I'm going to mention a white musician here who helped to coin the term Afropean with Zap Mama. I mean, Zap Mama's music is something else to talk about. But if you look at the Talking Heads that David Byrne fronted in the 1980s, I mean, he's a part of, obviously, of this incredible array of musicians like Brian Eno and Ryuichi Sakamoto, you know, and Yasuna Dawn, you know. These people within their music is the mix. They don't have to even talk about it. It's inherently in this musical mixture. And if you listen to anything that the Talking Heads did in the 1980s, it's all underpinned by African rhythms. And people don't always notice that, but it's always there. If you look at everything they did, it's almost everything that they did. It's an African rhythm underneath this rock music. So I love that you can fuse things together in a way that is kind of creates an entire atmosphere. I mean, what I tried to do with my photographs and my writing is create a similar kind of atmosphere. So there are things almost not said in my book that I hope still come across. But you can do that beautifully in music. You can create that world where you don't even have to say anything. You just say, hey, listen to this, and there is Afropean or a multicultural world, you know?
I would add, of course, music is a universal language, but in literature, there are huge Afropean characters, and you've mentioned two of them in your book, Pushkin and Alexandre Dumas.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I think within that is a kind of something I was really trying to think about. And this is very subtle, but I tried to think of rhythm and pace and to try and attach myself to a musical culture. So, you know, I look at the Harlem Renaissance and how you know, jazz powered up so many writers that emerged out of that scene, poets mostly. But with me, I see myself very much as part of the hip hop generation. And so you know, originally, I think it's kind of been muted completely and commodified hip hop. But, you know, if you look at somebody who's now disgraced, actually, Africa Bambaataa, but if you look at what he was trying to do with the movements, you know, he'd have different chapters of these kind of hip hop crews all around the world. And it was kind of a Pan-Africanism for the 80s and 90s that he was trying to achieve, you know. And so I wanted to kind of try and find a way to very quietly create the pulse of hip hop. And obviously I'm not rhyming, but the rhythm, and also I probably do it a little bit too much, but the kind of alliteration that I frequently use, it was to try and create a kind of musicality encoded into the sentences, in the way that the greats from other generations have done with music of the time, you know.
Thank you, Johny. Just when you were saying, talking about yourself, about being a photographer, and time is running, and we're about to follow this discussion with a little short movie that we're going to screen of you. But before that, I wanted to ask you, there is a very strong moment now that we're living in terms of representation, and which is a question that you mentioned several times in the book, and especially in photography, and how we show and Black people and Black European people, and how is it going to change now that we are putting this subject on the table, and how you said before, it's often everything or nothing. And a lot of political, cultural institutions are now making their autocritic and trying to change a little bit their habit. And we hope that this is not just a moment, and that it's going to be a deep change and not just a cover change. But yourself as a photographer, how do you see that movement? Yeah, that's a question.
Oh, it's interesting. Yeah, I mean, the big worry for me is that I think a lot of people compare the 2010s to the 1930s, but my worry actually is that the 2020s are going to be like the 1930s, you know, and obviously, like, if you look at the Harlem Renaissance and how it was crushed by the Great Depression, you know, my hope is that, you know, if times get tough, you know, that this moment can really continue. You know, if these you know, big corporations are still interested in 5 years, that to me is, you know, is the big challenge, you know, and I think it's on us to continue working outside of these corporations, whether they're there or not. It's on the people to keep doing their work and finding ways to make the work happen, regardless of what happens in any spaces of officialdom. And then you can only hope that the official spaces latch on and continue the fight. But at the same time, you know, it's encouraging. I don't want to be too negative or cynical about what is happening right now, because I think a great reckoning is coming to pass. And I think, you know, if you look at some of the discussions that we're having now, some of the discussions that are out in the open, you couldn't have had those even, you know, 10 years ago, at least in the mainstream. So I'm encouraged that we're having the discussion, but this moment needs to be sustained. It can't just be a moment, you know.
Of course.
And in terms of the photography, I'm inspired by the artist Emory Douglas, who was a part of the Black Panther Party. And what he did is he took all the ideas. I mean, it was propaganda, you know, visual propaganda. He would take all the ideas of the Black Panther Party and create illustrations so that anybody who wasn't engaged with the reading element could still engage with the ideas. And I suppose that's what I'm trying to do with my photographs, is suggest a blur. Poet Jackie Kay once saw my photographs and said, "Oh, are you commenting on W.E.B. Du Bois's notion of double consciousness? Because there are a lot of reflections in my work." And my answer was not consciously, you know, but that is there in that work, in the photographs, are ideas that maybe can't be put into words, and that should be left in a kind of ambiguous state where people can think about what is going on visually. And I think, like, again, to go back to the Harlem Renaissance, that was a whole movement. It was visual, it was political, you know, it involved dancing, it involved polemicists involved. You know, there was so much going on, and that's what I think needs to happen now. We need movies, we need academia, we need poetry. You know, we need stories.
Yes, and for that we also need to rethink a little bit the way the money of all these industries is divided. So I hope that everything is going to change very fast. Maybe, Amin Maalouf, I was thinking, what would you say today to your grandson reading that book?
Well, I think I would have difficulty to explain to him why I wrote that last page, because I was convinced that things would ultimately get better, and in the last 20 years they didn't get better, and the end of my latest essay, which was called The Naufrage des Civilisations, is the image of the Titanic going towards the iceberg. So between the two, I hope there would be something in between that would maybe avoid us a catastrophe. And on that level, maybe the moment we have lived in the last year could change something. Maybe we had a moment of pause, of reflection that might encourage us to go in different directions. So maybe when I analyze the situation, I always tend to be pessimistic, but at heart I am an optimist, and I think I always try and always will try to find a way out of our predicament.
Message of hope and lucidity. Johny Pitts, maybe a few words. We're going to close this chat. Thank you very much to both of you. And before that, you're going to tell us a little word about the movie that we're about to see, and which was not very much screened before, I think. Can you introduce that before we say goodbye?
Yes, and I just want to thank everybody for their time, and especially you. I mean, it's a great honor to, I know we're not meeting each other in person, but to speak with you, you're you know, I'll say it, you know, I don't want to sound too, I don't know, embarrassing, but you know, you're a big hero of mine. We didn't mention Leo the African, which again is another great work of historical fiction, you know, but thank you so much for your time and energy and for your work and for your trailblazing work. This project, this work that we're about to see includes the voices of many people I've spoken about actually now, including Zap Mama and Carol Phillips. And it's a kind of, I guess, a very strange, it's not a documentary exactly, but a kind of visual poem, which was mostly shot on the very last train that runs between Paris and Marseille. And this train used to be part of the journey of Le Train Bleu, which would take many famous people from Paris to Nice. And over the years it's changed, and it's not a glamorous train anymore, but people who've taken this train include some of the people like James Baldwin and you know, who've been on this train in the past. And so we got on this train, and it was literally shot about 2 weeks before they stopped the service, and it was shut down completely. So the overnight train between Paris and Marseille no longer exists. But we got this footage where, you know, it's visual. It's like an extension of my my photography and my writing, but also musical. And so it includes music that I made with my creative partner, Chris Morris. It also includes Teti Michel Pomasi, who wrote An African in Greenland. It includes a short a bit of a speech by him. So listen out for it, and I hope you enjoy it. And thank you so much for your time for this amazing award. And again, to Amin Maalouf for taking the time to speak with me.
Thank you very much, Johny. Yeah, there is a time to say goodbye. I mean, it's very difficult after such a nice conversation, so interesting. Thank you, Salomé, Amin and Johny. You really offered us a very profound moment of reflection. Now everybody will obey Amin Maalouf and read Afropean. That's for sure. Yeah, Johny, you end your book by explaining how you are looking at Africa, and then you turn back and you come back to Europe. So it means, like in every good essay, I think an essay is not finished. No, this book is not finished. There is something to continue, and yeah, we look forward to continue to read you, to look at your work. And now you offered us this present, this gift to finish. I think we will fade out with this essay, cinematographic essay together. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for the people who followed us online, and hope to see you, everybody, in presence soon.
Thank you.
Surinamese people, when it used to be a colony of Holland, people started to migrate to the motherland, because that's how you were taught. The motherland, the queen, and the white man, that's it. You shouldn't be black, but you should be almost as white in their thoughts and their mind, spirit, and everything.
I was reading something from Frantz Fanon, who was saying in Martinique, first thing you learn to say when you're a child is I am French.
Yeah, similar thing. Yeah. And I used to go to school in Suriname. When they gave geography, it was Dutch geography.
Okay.
So I learned all the places from, the river Rhine, where it connects and where it comes and where it flows into Holland and where. So Surinamese geography was.
Wow.
And also in history. You have to learn everything from the Middle Ages till King Floris V and everything. Dutch history.
I said, I don't want black people to think that their history started with slavery. So for me, it's pre-slavery, understanding that we were in, we had different religions, different names, different cultures, ethnicities, but that we are also always resisted.
Trying to synthesize more than one culture, more than one country, more than one tradition in one body. And, clean linear narrative of the type that Dickens wrote, it ain't going to do it for you. Because it's not going to reflect who you are.
Let me ask you this question. Okay. How did you come up with the word Afropean?
I didn't come up with the word, but it came to my attention through Zap Mama. And later Lanubians. I just like the idea that it wasn't hyphenated, it wasn't mixed this or half that. It was something that kind of expressed duality.
Hybrid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I just wondered if you identified with that at all.
Absolutely. Well, Afropean is really the result of all the cultures merging into the same city and living together. And we're the fruits of those cultures. Figuring out a way to get along.
Wants people to know about us, that we were existing. And when I went back at 18 to Congo, this is really where everything was clear in my head. And I said, I'm really not Congolese, I'm a European. I mean, my mentality is different, but I'm not completely European. There is something else there. It's strange how you perceive the Matonge in Belgium, because growing up here, I felt everything was so small. and Belgium, small country, only the Congolese, and I needed to grow, to travel and discover others. That's when I went to Paris to visit and try to meet the Caribbean, Martinique, Guadeloupe, Black, French. And said, what about you? We don't see you in the media. That I came there to meet them. And they was like, we're not African. And I said, okay, we need to do something. That's why I started as a mama and meet with the Nubians. And then with the Nubians, we did that tour together and they said, let's really spread that word, Afro-European. This is the way we spread it. And everybody, when you talk, they talk about our community, that we are existing, not individual. Here, like the Caribbean, the Congolese, the Ivory Coast, all different little spots, and said we need to find that term that's representing us.
If we have a culture, if we have traditions, it's just a way to make us united around something. And if that thing disappears, we go scattered.
Our dream was clear. I'm gonna earn my money and then go back to Africa. Now, our kids are not dreaming that way. They're here, they belong to here.
Mesdames et messieurs, nous vous souhaitons la bienvenue à bord du train 730 Afropean Express. Il s'arrêtera à toutes les gares, traversant la multiculture européenne. Veuillez à présent vous asseoir, vous détendre et profiter de cet incroyable voyage.
Boarded the night train, cloaked to light rain, poured from 10 skies, soaked the night, strained the light stained golden, glow from street lamps, absorbed the lost souls that roam the side lanes. I spied grab cats smoking high grade, coating walls in chrome with wild sprays. I awoke from a colonial migraine, my mind gained focus alone on my train. There in the middle of night, a transition on the intercity line, an epiphany. I got lost in the city of lies. The born knew a way to the typical sites, made official by scribes and commissioned for guides, or estranged from spaces where immigrants hide, where wisdom resides and interests collide with cliches revived by the ignorant right. Big city stigmas and dissident lives, lost between cultures in liminal times, but I adopt the fullness of this in my life. Europe and Africa mixed and entwined in the glint of my eye, by dint of my ties, too intrinsically linked but insistent divides. I sift through antiquity, swim in the tides of mixed histories, until they link and combine. As I looked at the view through scratch windows, sat still so I could match scenes with thoughts, I patched scenes. I attached dreams to roads till it appeared that my habitat revealed a home. Right there in Europe, the streets I roamed, as a black man from Paris back streets to Rome would transform. The gravitas arose the story to broadcast the African diaspora in Europe. This was a tour for all of les autres. Je suis un créole à votre. Come on.